противостоянии этим угрозам Россия также предлагает свое содействие. И мы заинтересованы в самом тесном сотрудничестве между правоохранительными структурами и специальными службами Российской Федерации и стран Африки. Настроены и в дальнейшем вести подготовку военнослужащих и сотрудников органов правопорядка африканских стран в российских специализированных учебных заведениях.
On June 22, 2025, Mali's military leader, Assimi Goïta, landed in Moscow, greeted with red carpets, military salutes, and full state honors. But this wasn't a routine diplomatic visit. It felt like a coronation. Why is Russia treating a West African president like a rising superpower? What's happening between Mali and Moscow? And why is the West suddenly nervous? Let's find out. It began the moment the wheels of Assimi Goïta's aircraft touched Russian soil. The visuals were unmistakable. An honor guard lined up in precision formation, Russian officials waiting in sharp suits, red carpet rolled to the stairs of the plane. This wasn't just protocol, it was power theater. And it wasn't lost on anyone watching. Mali's president wasn't being treated like the head of a troubled, landlocked state in West Africa. He was being honored like a leader of geopolitical consequence. This was Moscow's message, not just to Bamako, but to Washington, Paris, Brussels, and every African capital watching closely. Russia is choosing its partners, and it's choosing them boldly. In the world of diplomacy, optics matter as much as outcomes. And on that day in June, the optics were crystal clear. Assimi Goïta, a man who seized power in a coup, has become something much more in the eyes of the Kremlin, a symbol of Africa's pivot away from Western dominance and into a new multipolar alliance where military resolve is not punished but respected. Western media tried to downplay the spectacle, calling it symbolic or strategic theater, but that misses the point. The ceremony was the message. It told African nations that respect can be earned through sovereignty, not submission. It told leaders that rejecting Western control no longer means isolation. It might open doors to new powers, new weapons, and new leverage. This is not about nostalgia for Soviet-era alliances. This is about a recalibrated reality where Russia, no longer pretending to be a global moral compass, is offering cold, transactional partnerships with clear returns. No lectures, no aid with strings, just mutual interest and mutual defiance. For Goïta, it was a personal victory. 2 years ago, the international press branded him a rogue soldier and a danger to democracy. Now, he's standing next to some of the most powerful men in the world, discussing military strategy and energy corridors, not begging for development loans. The transformation didn't come from changing who he was. It came from changing who he stood next to. But this pageantry wasn't spontaneous. It was engineered. Sources in the Russian diplomatic corps suggest that Putin's team meticulously planned the arrival ceremony to be broadcast back home and across Africa. Every camera angle, every handshake, every note of the national anthems played was calibrated to demonstrate one thing: that Moscow doesn't see Mali as a client. It sees Mali as a partner. And behind all the formality, something else was taking shape. Something that Western diplomats fear more than any missile or military base: the birth of a narrative. One where Russia is the liberator of African sovereignty, and the West is the aging empire whose time has passed. That narrative is dangerous, not because it's false, but because it's gaining traction. Across the Sahel, across the halls of the AES alliance, even in parts of Central and East Africa, leaders are watching Goïta's Moscow reception and asking themselves, what if we're backing the wrong power? Because if Moscow can turn a military general from a sanctioned regime into a regional statesman, what else can it do? Build roads, train armies, launch satellites? For the first time in decades, Africa is dreaming beyond dependency. That's why the welcome ceremony matters. It wasn't about red carpets and anthems. It was about recognition, and recognition is power. So when Goïta stepped off that plane, he didn't just enter Moscow. He entered a new chapter of African diplomacy, one where former colonies stop asking for permission and start writing their own rules. But what comes after the pageantry? What did Goïta come to Russia to negotiate? The red carpet in Moscow was only the surface. Beneath the ceremony, lies the real reason Assimi Goïta is in Russia, to deepen a military partnership that has already reshaped Mali's battlefield. While the Western world debated human rights and democratic transitions, Russia was quietly building Mali's war machine. The moment France withdrew its last troops in 2022 and Operation Barkhane collapsed, Mali was left exposed. The insurgent threat in the north didn't pause. If anything, it accelerated, emboldened by the vacuum of power and the sudden retreat of Western forces. Goïta had a choice: beg for NATO's return or find new allies. He chose Moscow. Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. What started with whispers of security consultants soon became an open secret. Russian military advisors, armored personnel carriers, and even Mi-24 helicopter gunships began arriving in Mali. But this was not mere arms trading. Russia wasn't just selling Mali weapons, it was selling a whole new military doctrine. Fight to win, not to manage. No counterinsurgency workshops. No PowerPoint slides. Just kill zones and supply lines. And it worked. By early 2024, areas that had been under insurgent influence for years, particularly in Mopti and Gao, started to flip. Russian-trained Malian units, equipped with gear far superior to what France ever provided, launched direct strikes into insurgent camps. Drone surveillance allowed for targeted ambushes. The rules of engagement had changed, and so had the morale of the Malian army. For the first time in over a decade, fighters in the bush were afraid of them. That shift didn't go unnoticed. Western think tanks started issuing quiet memos. The Russian model may be brutal, but it's producing results. Of course, the media labeled it as excessive force or unaccountable operations. But inside Mali's Ministry of Defense, the results spoke louder than condemnation. The territory was being reclaimed, civilians were returning home, and the army, once seen as corrupt and demoralized, was being feared again, this time in a good way. Now in Moscow, Goïta isn't coming to thank Russia. He's coming to upgrade the deal. Sources close to the delegation suggest Mali is pushing for 3 major military breakthroughs during this visit. A permanent Russian military logistics hub in Bamako, one that could service not just Mali, but potentially the entire AES bloc Burkina Faso and Niger, giving Russia a semi-permanent footprint in the Sahel. The transfer of drone production technology, allowing Mali to assemble its own unmanned surveillance and combat drones on home soil, breaking its reliance on imports. Joint training programs on asymmetric warfare and anti-insurgent operations, specifically designed for desert and rural environments, something NATO's manuals never really covered for African terrain. All of this, if secured, would turn Mali from a client state into a military partner, and it would change the power balance in West Africa permanently. But Russia isn't doing this for charity. The Kremlin's goal is clear: create a strong, reliable set of allies in Africa that can project Moscow's influence, challenge NATO's presence, and become testing grounds for Russian-made weapons in real conflict zones. Mali offers the perfect combination: a willing government, a legitimate security threat, and no Western boots on the ground to complicate things. This partnership is already changing regional dynamics. Burkina Faso and Niger have begun replicating parts of Mali's playbook. The AES bloc is talking openly about coordinated defense policy, even a joint military force. And guess who they want as their unofficial advisor? Not the US, not the UN, Russia. There's an unspoken rule in international affairs: whoever trains your army eventually shapes your politics. And right now, Mali is being trained by Moscow. So when Goïta sits down with Putin in private, they won't just be talking about equipment. They'll be talking about ideology, strategy, and loyalty. Because guns are just the beginning. But if the battlefield is being handled by Russia, who is building Mali's future? The roads, the power plants, the economy. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Once the guns fall silent, or at least fall under control, the next battle begins. The battle for infrastructure, for energy, for economic independence. And this is exactly where Mali's partnership with Russia is taking a deeper, more transformative turn. Goïta's Moscow visit isn't just about military cooperation, it's about rebuilding the entire skeleton of the Malian state and doing it without begging the West for aid or approval. For decades, Mali's roads have been broken, its power lines fragile, and its economic arteries clogged by bureaucracy, corruption, and dependency. French-funded projects promised a lot and delivered little. IMF loans paved highways straight into debt traps. The only things built reliably were colonial legacies, mining routes that served foreign corporations, not the people. But Russia sees a different map, one where the capital isn't connected to rural communities by ghost roads, but by functional corridors. One where the Niger River isn't just a scenic landmark, it's a source of hydroelectric potential. One where Mali, instead of exporting raw gold and importing refined fuel, processes its resources domestically. Goïta's Moscow meetings this week are aimed at unlocking that vision, and it starts with three game-changing sectors: energy, transport, and industrial development. Mali suffers from chronic energy shortages. Over 60% of its population lives without reliable electricity, and the national grid is patchy at best. Blackouts aren't a crisis, they're a way of life. Russia is offering to change that, with something Western partners never dared to propose: nuclear energy. Not large-scale Cold War-era reactors, but modular nuclear units designed for low-capacity but high-efficiency generation. Perfect for nations like Mali, with scattered population centers and unstable grids. Rosatom, Russia's nuclear agency, is reportedly in advanced talks with Bamako to deploy these units across strategic regions, offering long-term, reliable electricity without dependence on foreign fossil fuel markets. Even more interesting, Mali wants not just to use the energy, but to learn the technology. This isn't charity, it's knowledge transfer, the kind that builds sovereign expertise. That's not all. Russian engineers are exploring Mali's untapped hydroelectric sites and natural gas pockets, aiming to create a hybrid grid that combines traditional sources, renewables, and nuclear. If this is implemented, Mali could become the first fully energy-sovereign nation in the Sahel. Then, Mali's economy bleeds because it cannot move. Roads are broken, trains are outdated. Trade relies on foreign-controlled routes through Côte d'Ivoire or Senegal, making Mali vulnerable to political blackmail and regional instability. Russia is proposing an overhaul. Using a model it has already deployed in parts of Central Asia, Russian firms want to build a new rail and highway corridor linking Mali not just to its rural regions, but to Niger, Burkina Faso, and possibly even Guinea. The goal? Create an internal AES trade belt, one that moves military, agricultural, and industrial goods without ever touching a Western-aligned port. There's even talk of a joint logistics-free zone complete with Russian-built depots, airstrips, and fuel storage, essentially transforming Mali into a landlocked power hub rather than a dependent hinterland. This could radically shift West African trade flows, especially if it connects to planned ports in Guinea currently being negotiated under Russian-Chinese influence. Also, Mali is rich in gold, bauxite, uranium, and rare earths. But like many African nations, it exports raw material and imports finished products, a colonial economic model kept alive by European and American corporations. Russia, however, is offering joint ventures in local refining, mineral processing, and fertilizer production. Already, Malian officials have announced the establishment of the country's first gold refinery, capable of processing 400 kilograms per day, in cooperation with non-Western partners. And this is just the beginning. The Kremlin is reportedly supporting Mali's ambition to build agro-industrial zones along major river systems, with plans for tomato processing plants, cotton textile mills, and rice packaging centers. These projects may sound modest compared to flashy defense contracts, but they're the real foundation of economic sovereignty. Because sovereignty isn't just about borders, it's about what you eat, how you cook it, and whether you can afford to keep the lights on. This is what makes Russia's offer so different from the IMF playbook. No austerity, no endless feasibility studies, no parachuted consultants, just cranes, cables, and concrete. So while the world focuses on Mali's new tanks and fighter drones, the real transformation is happening underground, in the water pipes, electrical grids, and railway foundations being planned right now. But there's one chain left to break. One colonial relic still binds Mali and its neighbors to Europe's financial leash. And Goïta's next target? It's not a weapon, it's a currency. Concrete and reactors may rebuild Mali's cities, but Goïta knows true sovereignty isn't measured in roads or megawatts. It's counted in currency. And right now, Mali's wallet is still chained to Paris. Despite all the bold declarations and military independence, Mali, like 14 other African nations, remains bound to the CFA franc, a colonial-era currency pegged to the euro and backed by the French treasury. On paper, it's stable. In practice, it's a leash, one that lets Paris control the heartbeat of Malian finance without even setting foot in Bamako. Every major budget decision, every trade deal, every interest rate adjustment must orbit around a financial system that favors Europe. Even Mali's gold reserves, vast and growing, are trapped in a monetary system that bleeds value upwards. It's not just inconvenient, it's undignified. That's why Goïta didn't just bring defense ministers and energy officials to Moscow, he brought financial architects. Because this time, Mali isn't just buying weapons, it's drawing up blueprints for monetary liberation. One of the most underreported but potentially explosive goals of this Moscow visit is the creation of a CFA exit strategy, a roadmap for decoupling Mali's economy from France's monetary authority. And Russia isn't just supporting it in spirit, it's offering tools, models, and alternatives. At the center of these discussions is the idea of bilateral trade in local currencies, bypassing the CFA franc and even the US dollar entirely. Under this model, Mali would buy Russian oil, wheat, and military equipment in rubles, while Russia would purchase Malian gold, cotton, and uranium in a future West African currency or a specially designed digital trade unit. This isn't science fiction. It's already happening across the BRICS world. China and Russia are doing it. India and Iran are testing it. Brazil and South Africa are exploring it. The only thing stopping Africa has been fear and French pressure. But Goïta doesn't scare easily. Insiders say Mali is now in early-stage consultations with Russian central banking officials and digital currency engineers to design a parallel financial mechanism that would allow Sahel nations, particularly the AES bloc, to process international payments outside SWIFT and beyond the Eurozone's reach. This mechanism could later evolve into a shared West African currency backed by commodities, gold, oil, or uranium, instead of foreign reserves held in European banks. It's a direct attack on the CFA system and, by extension, French financial dominance. And it's catching on. Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré has already floated the idea of a new regional central bank. Niger's leadership has begun questioning the utility of the CFA in the current geopolitical landscape. And now, with Russia's full technical support, these ideas are inching closer to reality. Moscow isn't just helping for free. It sees this as part of a larger war. A currency war that complements its global struggle against US hegemony and European influence. If Mali and its allies pull off a successful CFA exit, it sets a dangerous precedent for the West. It would show African nations they can survive, even thrive, outside the structures they were told were essential. For France, this is the real red line. Military withdrawals hurt, diplomatic snubs sting. But the loss of CFA dominance? That's an existential threat. Because through the CFA, France earns interest on African reserves, stabilizes its own euro contributions, and quietly influences the financial policies of half a continent. Without it, Paris becomes just another European capital, with no direct control over African wealth, budgets, or currencies. This is why Paris has lobbied aggressively behind the scenes to keep Mali in the fold. It's why every anti-CFA movement has been branded populist or misguided by French economists. And it's why Goïta's economic maneuvers in Moscow are being watched with more anxiety than even his arms deals. If Mali successfully builds a new trade framework with Russia and begins transitioning off the CFA, even partially, it will spark a domino effect across the region. Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, Togo, Benin, all of them may start asking dangerous questions about who controls their future. And it will be Mali, once dismissed as unstable and irrelevant, leading the charge. That's why this part of the visit, though quieter than the defense agreements, may be the most revolutionary of all. Because when a nation takes back control of its money, it takes back control of everything else too, from its imports and exports to its identity and dignity. If Mali fully breaks away from the CFA franc, do you think other West African countries will follow its lead? Let us know in the comment section. Can an Africa-Russia alliance truly bring lasting stability to the Sahel, or will it create new risks? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.